over to you. I think it's good to get a break and like have some drinks or something. But yeah, it's been awesome. Come and chat to me if you want to find out more about my work, and just if you want to be my friend. Yay.
So, now we've got a very exciting part. Sophie Elliott, welcome to the stage. She is the editor and founder of the unashamedly famous feminist magazine Parallel, that you may or may not have heard of, but she's going to speak about a bit. She's going to be speaking about female representation in the media and also a bit about her magazine, so I'll hand you over now.
Hello. So yeah, as she said, my name's Sophie. I'm the editor and founder of a feminist magazine which is called Parallel. I'm basically going to talk today about women's representation in the media, particularly in magazines and in fashion imagery and things like that. I come from a photography background. I've got a degree in photography, and I used to obsessively collect magazines, women's magazines, teenage magazines, things like that. So when I went to university, I really wanted to do fashion photography and be in all the magazines and all of that. But I also really like the publication side of all the photography. So I started looking more at zines and underground publications and DIY culture, and that started me looking at things like Riot Girl, and so I began looking at feminism. And so after months of kind of reading about it, taking pictures, things like that, I kind of came to the right realization that the media representation of women is actually one of the biggest problems in our society today. And I know that's quite a big statement, so I just want to do a bit of a visual representation first. So if you can just put your hand in the air if a image in the media has ever made you feel bad about yourself in any kind of way. So that's quite a lot of people. So basically I'm going to go through this by kind of dissecting an average women's magazine, the imagery, the photographs that would have been used, things like that. So last week I went out and bought the most recent issue of Cosmo, which is subtitled The Curve Edit, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. Out of the 234 pages, 81 of them were outright advertisements, so that's about 35% of the magazine. And those are adverts from the big brands, so fashion houses, beauty, jewellery, things like that, and they're things that the magazines don't really have any say over in terms of content. All they really do is just pump them out to the magazines that have the correct target audience. So these adverts generally include the same kind of model, so they'll be young, they'll be thin, white, and they'll particularly be able-bodied. It's very rare to see a disabled woman featured in a fashion editorial or advert. Generally speaking, they'll be photoshopped until they don't actually look like the real-life model. They'll be thin, but usually not actually bony because they edit the bones out to make it look a bit more perfect. They'll be youthful because aging is evil and we should all try as hard as we can to prevent it. And they will be able-bodied, as I said, and white, despite the fact that the population of most of the Western countries looking at the magazines will be incredibly more diverse. Even in the animated and illustrated adverts, they tend to focus on these things. One advert I saw recently was for tampons and had the tagline, "Adapt to your unique shape," while still featuring the silhouette of a stick-thin woman with Barbie-like proportions that didn't really make much sense. So then you get to the more subtle adverts, so things like the fashion spreads within the magazine that have been created by the fashion teams, fashion editors, things like that, and the beauty advice sections. So out of the 234 pages of the Cosmo that I read, 70 of them included these more subtle advertisements. And that's about 30% of the magazine, so now we're up to 65%, which is actually half of the entire publication. Fashion editorials generally follow some kind of story, so it might be a well-groomed upper-class woman, might be a love story, but again the models tend to follow the same tropes, so thin, white, young and able-bodied. Beauty sections are something that actually really irritate me on a personal level. I've got eczema, I've got psoriasis, So when I see photographs of women whose pores have actually been photoshopped off their faces so they don't exist anymore, it is quite insulting. And it's very manipulative because it's telling the readers that they can look like this if they buy this product and follow these instructions, when actually no one on the planet can physically look like that. It's just impossible. And then we have, of course, the what's new this season trend, which just dictate to you what you should wear and why your clothes and style are suddenly uncool and why you should go out and spend more money. So we're constantly visually assaulted by image of the unrealistic beauty ideals that lead to scrutiny and self-objectification. If you don't know, self-objectification is defined as the act of seeing yourself from a third-party perspective or through the eyes of another person, and thereby evaluating yourself based just solely on your appearance. And this act, coupled with the daily bombardment of unattainable expectations, can lead to things like low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and body shame. And there have actually been links proven to exist between self-objectification and body surveillance, and things like body shame and disordered eating. So in June of this year, it was revealed that hospital admissions for eating disorders have actually doubled, increasing from 959 teenagers in 2010 to 11 to over 1,800 in 2013 to 14. And that figure is almost triple the amount of sufferers earlier on in kind of 2003 to 4, when only around 600 teenagers were admitted. And those are obviously just the cases that were hospitalised. So there's also the economic inequality to consider with this. So when normal everyday imagery includes women who have actually been altered to have no blemishes or stretch marks, no pores or wrinkles or physical flaws at all, that then becomes the norm. And it becomes an expectation for young women that this is what they're actually aiming for in their lives. This in turn can cause them to spend millions of pounds every single year on makeup and clothes, even cosmetic surgery, which again has increased in the recent years. And fashion changes almost monthly, so it just becomes a never-ending cycle of spending because people just can't obtain the perfection of these altered image, so they just keep buying and buying and buying. And this in itself, again, is inherently classist. For young women from lower or working class backgrounds, the image of the ideal woman is even more unattainable. The clothes advertised within fashion editorials are frequently designer clothes that cost hundreds, if not thousands of pounds to purchase. And obviously the ever-changing nature of fashion means that a new wardrobe every single month is just out of the question. The women featured within the photographs are generally middle or upper class, and they are shown to just be happy and kind of perfect within their lives. And it's just advertisers feeding off an insecurity to make women who've not met this ideal feel like they need to in order to be happy. And what this then does is further marginalise those who are lower or working class, those who can't afford it. So in 2011, nearly a third of single UK women lived in low-income households, and 2/3 of the UK's low-paid workers were actually women. Bear with me. So I've just got a list here of things that women naturally do. So obviously they age, their bellies get bigger and boobs get droopier, their skin gets more wrinkly, they get blemishes, they get spots, they have babies and get stretch marks, they lose weight and gain loose skin, they get ill and get scars, they are abused, they get cancer, some people have breasts removed, they lose jobs and they lose money, they're born with physical disabilities that they can't and don't want to change, they go blind or they grow hair, and that is also a list of things that the beauty and fashion industry just don't depict in their images. Because the idealistic image of an unattainable beauty means only one thing to them, and that is money. In March of 2014, Vogue's editor Alexandra Schulman admitted that she gets fed up of having to deal with the question of why her models are thin, and that nobody really wants to see a real person looking like a real person on the cover of Vogue, which I think is a disgusting quote. What she and other magazine editors don't seem to realise is that their opinions really matter. Their opinions on disabled women, fat women and diversity influence everyone, because there's a trickle-down effect when it comes to this kind of thing. Whatever the editors and top-end designers say goes. Whatever they see as acceptable is acceptable, and according to them, reality is not acceptable. Why is that? Because reality just doesn't sell. Another important thing to consider, which has been touched on already today, is the sexualization and objectification of women in these adverts, both the externally and internally designed ones. So fashion magazines, adverts and editorials are all guilty of one repetitive trope, and that is the sexualization of women's bodies. It's not difficult to look through a magazine to find a photograph that portrays that. It might be just a sultry model pouting into the camera, or it might be actual sexual violence, or even the portrayal of women as dying or even dead. Fashion photography has become another medium that seeks to oppress women through the idea that we're sexual objects. It's dehumanizing. It turns us into objects to be looked at and have sexual acts done to us. And it contradicts the messages that many of these magazines are trying to put forward in their articles. If the target audience of fashion magazines is women, why are the women in their editorials and adverts portrayed in this way? With fashion, so many people aspire to be the clones of the models and images depicted. So if women are depicted as sexual objects and as victims of violence and abuse in our mainstream media, what hope for the development of women's rights do we have? Fashion is and always has been a pawn in the overriding influence of the patriarchy. It dictates what we should look like, and now it degrades and belittles the actual safety and existence of women. And that's why I have a severe distrust for women's magazines, because they can say what they want about being feminist or being for women, but at the end of the day, when 65% or more of their magazine is filled with anti-women propaganda, and that's how I see it considering the links that have been proven for the negative effects of these images, I have a really hard time believing it. You can insist that you're for women, but stepping on the everyday woman to gain money just entirely negates that statement. And speaking of excluding particular women, racial inequality is obviously still highly prevalent within magazines and fashion advertising. The majority of models used within this type of imagery are white, and even the beauty sections and advice sections and things like that are very exclusionary because they focus on pale skin and straight hair and European beauty standards. So back to the curve edit of Cosmo. After 14 pages in the middle of the magazine of their regularly scheduled skinny, white, young, able-bodied editorials, comes a page declaring this issue the curve edit. It featured 13 pages of regular-sized women, and it took up measly 5.5% of the magazine. The photographs were hidden towards the back of the magazine in their own clearly marked section, so that there's no kind of misunderstanding that this isn't the regularly scheduled programming for the magazine. So how do we tackle these problems? There have been plenty of suggestions in the past, and some of these have come into effect in other countries, such as clearly labelling photoshopped images and banning models of certain weights of appearing in magazines and shows and things like that. And there are already guidelines out there from the Advertising Standards Authority regarding sexual content with adverts. But they've still not changed, and it's very unlikely that they're going to. Because when magazines like this are based on profit and pleasing their advertisers, the chance of them upping and switching to a more diverse range of representation is slim, because they're just going to piss off their advertisers, lose money, and they won't be able to make the magazine anymore. Something that could really help to improve self-perception and the understanding of media representation is education. We obviously already have sex education and we have PSHE, but something that is really needed in schools is the opportunity to actually analyse and criticise media representation of not just women but men as well. And I'm not just referring in this instance to advertisements and magazines, I'm also referring to things like porn and TV, films and music as well. Just all forms of media. We live in a world where media is the #1 influence on the perception and opinions of young people. But when the media is so obsessed with sexualizing, objectifying, and using unrealistic standards to sell products and lifestyles, as opposed to actually representing and discussing real-life people, we enter really dangerous territory. Another way to tackle this problem is something that we all actually do every single day without really thinking about it. It's just become a part of society's subconscious, really, and that is community and social activism. So So social media networks are constantly filled with photographs and selfies of women, regardless of their size, age, race, wealth, ability, disability. It really doesn't matter. It's just women celebrating women. There are dedicated blogs out there set up for women of certain types. So, for example, there are websites out there with makeup tips just for women of colour that steer away from Eurocentric ideals. There are blogs set up just to increase and encourage self-confidence, and there are websites out there for people of larger sizes and things like that, just to boost morale. So to quote Naomi Wolf, once we break through and change the rules of our sense of our own beauty, it cannot be shaken. Sing that beauty and dress it up and flaunt it and revel in it. The internet nowadays is filled with women empowering women and women showing off their version of beauty without a single high-end fashion house editorial insight. And that's what we need more of. We need more selfies, we need more confidence, more of our individualistic sense of fashion and style. We need more body autonomy, more images of women owning their own sexuality rather than being treated like objects. We need more community and less girl hate. Because despite their best intentions, what inevitably results from women's magazines is an environment of competition. The way we are represented within the media forces women to attempt to reach an unattainable ideal, with those who are closer to the end result judging those who literally and physically cannot get near it. And it damages women in every single way possible. It makes us sick, it makes us depressed, it uses our money and it uses our time. It objectifies us and it trivializes us and it marginalizes us. And that is why I believe that media representation of women is one of the biggest problems facing our society today. Thank you.
Sophie! Thank you. Sure. Sorry, is it okay? I'm very used to comparing. I'm just having knowledge of other.
Has anyone got any questions for Sophie? If you have, just put your hand up. Okay, we've got that on there.
Thank you very much for creating Parallel.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Sophie didn't hear, she was just saying that the actual